All right, guys, today I want to just give you the instructions for this lab. So, we're talking about variation in populations, and we talked about variation before when we talked about genetics, but now we're talking about it again in um, natural selection and evolution. And natural selection, it's important for natural selection because if you remember, natural selection is like survival of the fittest. And so, if you imagine that only the fittest animals survive and reproduce, and that's how a population changes or evolves, well, if we're all identical, then no one individual is going to have an advantage over the other, and so that population will not change if you have all identical individuals. So variation is important for evolution to happen, and there is variation in every population, so that change or that evolution does happen. So variation, if you remember, comes from mutations, and it comes from sexual reproduction, right? Having two parents causes a lot of variation in populations. Okay. So, okay, you guys are going to read through this. You're going to see this in class, this page here. What you guys are going to do is, so you'll read through these directions here, but essentially what you're going to do is count a bunch of beans. And you're not going to count them, sorry, you're going to measure beans, right? And the idea is that the beans represent any population that you may want to simulate. Okay, so the beans may represent tigers or lions or zebras or plants or whatever, and you're going to see that there is variation in even these beans too, which represent some species. Okay, so just real quick to talk about, I just want to use this blank space to talk about how we're going to measure. So when you're measuring something, so let's say we have a ruler, and let's say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's say this is 1 centimeter. And so the littler markings, the smaller markings are millimeters, right? That's what we're going to measure our beans in. So let's say that our bean is, that's the end right there. Oh no. Let's say that our bean looks like it's right here. It looks like it's right in the middle of this mark. Oh no, what is happening? Okay, so let's say the bean is right in the middle of that mark. Well, a rule for measuring here is we can estimate half of the smallest marking here. And so the smallest marking is this, which is a millimeter. So we are allowed to estimate half of that. So here we have 10 millimeters. This is 11, and this would be 12. So we have 11.5 millimeters, and that would be a fair estimate to make. That would be a good use of the proper use of the ruler. Okay. However, you cannot estimate 11.6 or 11.7. It's like, how do you know? How do you even know? We can say this looks like it's right in the middle, so it is half. Or if it is closer to the middle than it is to 11, or closer to the middle than it is to 12, then we can say half. Okay, and that is a fair use of the ruler. Okay, so you're going to measure 30 beans. You're going to look at the instructions. That's what it says, 30 beans. And what you're going to need to do is make a chart. So you want to know how many of each size how many of each size there are of those beans. And so the smallest bean you're probably going to see is 7 or so. Okay, and since we can only measure by half, so we're going to go 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5, oops, 9, it's an 8, and so on, all the way probably to like 15, and that's probably the biggest one that you'll see. And so you're going to tally how many you find. Say you find 1.5, and you find 2, and then maybe you find 3 or 5, or maybe you find 2 of these. You're going to count how many of each size that you have. Okay, and then when you graph it, you're going to graph this on graph paper that you can get from me. It's going to be height down here in millimeters, and then this will be number of beans of whatever size that you have down here. Okay, cool. So that is how that is going to work. Then once you're done with that, once you're done with your graph here, you're going to look at, I made class data. So for number one, it says describe the shapes of each of the two graphs. So you're going to compare your own graph here to the graph that I made, which I'll show you in a second. You're also going to do questions 2 and 3, and make useful sentences. Do that as thoroughly as you can. So here is the graph that you are going to compare to. So here, this is class data. Okay, so whatever your graph looks like, you are going to compare to this one. I did not label the axes or the bottom or top because I want you to do that on your own, on yours. And then I want you to write the title and make sure your title. So you're going to have to go back to that. I want you to make sure your title it has the independent variable and the dependent variable. Okay, so that's pretty much the assignment. Let me know if you have any questions, Kate.